we don't expand our imagination.
Justification for being what you are.
And welcome to Washington Unplugged. I'm Bill Plante. In every campaign cycle, what's one of the first things to get the buzz? Well, the ads, of course. The best of them quickly go viral on the net. We have a wild crop of ads this year, thanks in large part to our first guest today, Fred Davis. Davis is the mastermind behind some of this year's most talked about political spots. He joins me now from Los Angeles. Good morning, good afternoon, welcome.
Good morning, Bill.
So you've got some pretty memorable ads out there. You've got Christine O'Donnell's I'm Not a Witch, you've got Carly Fiorina's Demon Sheep, and the Barbara Boxer balloon. Where do these ideas come from?
Oh, I have no idea. We have a very creative bunch. I think that's why we're located in Hollywood maybe instead of Washington or something. And we look at what is it we're trying to get across. In the case of Demon Sheep, it was that our opponent was maybe not as conservative as he was saying. In the case of Christine O'Donnell, it was that she is not remotely anything you've heard about in the past. In the case of Barbara Boxer, it was maybe that her time is up, maybe that she was full of hot air and not a lot of good decisions for California and America. And then we just try to find a way that's really memorable to get those points across.
Well, would you agree that these ads are radically different from the sort of traditional political ad?
I would say they're pretty different, but look at what's on the air right now. There's thousands and thousands and thousands of political ads, and yet for some reason you asked me to be here. And I think the reason you asked me to be here is that our ad somehow stood out from those thousands. Still got the points across, and maybe the traditional ads did as well, but hopefully ours don't require the same huge expenditures of media to get the point across.
Well, now there's an interesting point because your ads have gone viral on the net, as you well know. Is that part of what you're trying to do here? I mean, because you don't have to make as big a buy to get talked about if suddenly these pop up on the net a million times.
It's really hard I feel sorry for my candidates having to raise money, especially with federal spending limits. It's difficult. You get these little tiny checks and they mean a lot to the voter, the donor who's giving it, and yet you have to get so many of those that we try to expand the value for every dollar that our candidates have to raise. So we try to get you more miles for your dollar, I guess. We don't ever start out and say, gosh, this ad might go viral, but we think if we do a really good job on an ad that stands out on its own, that maybe it will end up going viral. The viral's sort of the cherry on top. It's the extra plus, but we try to get it to stand out on television as well.
What do you say to the grumbling criticism that, well, these ads steer away from content and facts and just try to shock you?
I don't think they do. I think the shock factor or the unique factor is there to get you to notice it, and then we give you the facts. Demon Sheep, what was the fact? That Tom Campbell was not as conservative as he said he was. That fact got across crystal clear, and look at the final election. Barbara Boxer, maybe more hot air than delivering the goods for California. Look at the polls now, essentially tied in a state where that would have been seen as impossible some time ago. So we get the facts in as well. We just try to get your attention and get you to remember it first.
So is this the future of political ads, more like what you're doing than selling soap or cereal?
I don't see any difference between political ads and selling a Ford or a Chevy. I saw a shockingly memorable print ad for Ford last night in a magazine. I was amazed that they're raising the ante to that point, and I think it's going to be enormously successful for them. So every advertiser, the number one goal is to get your message across, but it's to get people to remember it. Look at the new ad campaign I was just reading about yesterday for, I think it's Microsoft's new phone. It's one of the weirdest campaigns I've ever seen, and yet I think it's going to be very successful because it's different and it'll stand out.
So they finally learned something from Apple, huh?
Maybe so, maybe so.
Fred Davis, thanks very much because you've obviously made an impression this political season. We appreciate your being with us.
Appreciate it, Bill. Thank you a lot.
All right, moving on now. Someone once said that the thinnest of lines divide us the most. And nowhere is that more true than in the lines that are drawn to form political districts, whether
After each reapportionment,
or the state legislature or your school district. Now, congressional districts, you may remember from civics, get redrawn every 10 years after the census, and 2011 is that year. Democrats are already worried that if Republicans do as well as predicted in November in state elections, they'll be in a position to influence the redrawing of the districts. That's called gerrymandering, and it's been around about as long as we've been a nation. Jerry Reichert directed a documentary on that, which focuses on the unfair and the advantageous side of the practice. Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks very much.
And Jerry, what exactly about gerrymandering, which is not new, keeps it still sort of a secret and under the radar?
Well, I think it's the fact that it happens most often in the sort of proverbial smoke-filled rooms behind closed doors. This is a process that's controlled by legislatures and done in such a way to advantage the interests of those legislatures. So it's not really about providing the best representation for the public anymore. It's really about preserving incumbency and preserving politicians' hold on power.
What about the fact that politicians do it, including, for example, the current president, who did it when he was a state legislator?
Yeah, I mean, you know, we show in the film how Barack Obama was involved in redrawing a district for himself in 2001. And, you know, we do that not to make Barack Obama a villain, but to show that the system is really something that's broken. And it's sort of, you know, you're kind of inviting all these politicians into a room and saying, well, here are the keys to your political power, but don't start the engine. You know, I think we'd be hard pressed if we were put in similar kinds of circumstances to not act on that impulse, to not try and preserve our jobs.
Well, first of all, I called you Jerry, and it's Jeff, and I apologize for that.
That's
so
okay.
You're Jeff Reichert, and you've directed this documentary, which we're seeing bits of on the screen, called Gerrymandering. Why'd you make it?
I made it because it seemed like that it's so fascinating. There's this kind of fundamental invisible power structure that underlies everything we do as a democracy. You know, you live in a district, I live in a district, everybody who's watching this show lives in a district, and all of those districts are drawn by someone, usually not with the constituents of that district's best interests at heart. And that seemed to me something that Americans should really know about and should really be a participant of, rather than just sort of this, you know, these kind of like chits on a game board to be moved around at the whim of politicians.
But it benefits or hurts each party depending upon who's in power.
Sure.
Could you argue that in the end it all works out?
Yeah, I mean, but do we have a democracy just so that way the parties can work it out amongst themselves? That's not what we're here for. You know, we didn't set this whole thing up so that way the Democrats and the Republicans could just achieve parity nationwide in who controls which redistricting processes. The idea is that voters would choose the representation that they want, and we would fight it out in elections, and sometimes we win and sometimes we lose. In this case, it's really, you know, the politicians always win, and the voters always lose.
So you chose as an example for this film the fight over Proposition 11 in California, which was to end redistricting by legislators.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it seemed like an interesting story. You know, our heroes in the film are they're an immigrant and a child of immigrants. One of them is very famous. Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, immigrant, came to this country. You know, liked the idea of the democracy that
Did
we
pretty
had here.
well.
Did pretty well for himself. And Kathy Fung from California Common Cause, who her parents moved to this country to be a participant in this democracy. And I like the idea that, you know, these kinds of folks are they're kind of the mythology of America. These people coming here to participate saw a problem within the system, and it's a very weird problem. People don't really pay attention to redistricting. They saw this problem and decided we're going to try and come together and make a change, and they were successful.
Well, the Democrats, of course, in the California legislature fought very hard against it.
Sure, I mean, they don't want to give up their control over the levers of power, and which, you know, it's understandable in some ways, and they're still continuing that fight in this redistricting round, trying to undo the work that was done when the voters passed Proposition 11. And so this is a hard fight. You know, nobody wants to give up and sort of unilaterally disarm in a certain state and say, okay, we're going to do fair redistricting here, but, you know, if the Democrats do that in California, what are the Republicans going to do to us in Texas and Florida and Michigan? So it's a very tough issue.
So where does it go? I mean, it's in the courts. Can it take effect based on the census of 2010?
Well, so what is on the ballot in California right now, essentially, is that Prop 11 is passed, and so there's a commission to cover state legislative districts. There's now Proposition 20, which would extend the jurisdiction of that commission to cover congressional districts. There's also Prop 27, which is sponsored by many folks in the Democratic Party, whose policies I actually like a lot, but it would disband the commission, the Prop 11 commission, before it even starts. And so there is a potential that we may never, the redistricting reform in California may actually not happen, depending on what happens at the polls in November.
Well, as one of the people who was in your documentary, Bill Cavala, says in the documentary, when you draw a district, it's going to help one party and harm the other. There's just no way around that.
Sure, and I think we can argue endlessly about the results of a particular plan, but I think that kind of misses the point. If the process that we go through to achieve that plan is inherently unfair, that's where we should be focusing our attention. And I think there's a real conflict of interest in legislators drawing themselves districts, whether for to maintain the office that they have, or to maintain or to set themselves up for a future office. That's not, again, it's not what we have a democracy for. It's not so that the legislators can pick voters. It's so voters can pick legislators.
Jeff Reichert, where can we see your film?
It's going to be in theaters across the country starting October 15th, and we're going to be rolling it out nationwide through the fall.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And we end today's show with this week's Flashpoints Around the World with Senior National Security Advisor Juan Zarate. We can start, I guess, with the attack on the motorcade of British diplomats in Yemen.
Yeah, Bill.
What's going on in Yemen? More and more.
More and more. I think the last 2 weeks have reminded us that al-Qaeda's presence in Yemen continues to be real and very dangerous. The motorcade for the British was hit. Fortunately, no one was killed, but it reminds us of the attempts by al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula to go after Western targets. The British ambassador was targeted over the summer, and we've seen repeated attacks by al-Qaeda on government installations, police stations, and other sites. And it reminds us that al-Qaeda remains a viable force. We've also seen, just this past week, Bill, 2 declarations from al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. A new army that's been established, according to their leadership, to overthrow the government in Sana'a, named the Army of Aid Nabayan, going back to a group that existed in the 1990s in Yemen. Also, we saw the second edition of the online magazine Inspire, which calls upon American Muslims and others to attack in the United States, including in restaurants here in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, they said go in at lunchtime and spray a crowd. You'll get some government officials.
That's exactly right. And so this is a viable organization. Government officials here in the United States talk about the al-Qaeda affiliate in Yemen as the most active and the most dangerous. And certainly after December 25th, the failed Detroit airliner bomber, it's gotten a lot more attention. But it tends to fall off the radar screen a bit in terms of our public consciousness. But they're there. They've got 400 to 600 fighters, and they're adapting to the pressure, and they're very good.
Let's go to Pakistan, which is certainly on our radar because of the difficulty we've had interacting with the government there over its support for the support of the army for some elements of al-Qaeda. And now you've got militant Muslim militants attacking some of the moderates in Pakistan.
That's exactly right. We've been focusing on Pakistan for good reason, on issues of Afghanistan, issues of extremists, and also because of where they stand generally in the region in terms of their geopolitics. But this is an issue that has largely gone uncovered, and that is the attack on the moderates within the Muslim communities, the different sects within Pakistani society that are being attacked by the Pakistan Taliban and the extremists. You had last week a very violent attack on a Sufi shrine. The Sufis, a more mystical, moderate strand of Islam. That followed an attack in Lahore several months ago that killed 42 people. This latest attack killed about 10 people. An Ahmadi sect shrine killed dozens a few months ago, and several shrines have been attacked. This is part of a trend where moderates are getting attacked directly, physically, with bombs and snipers, and I think it's a dangerous trend that we're seeing within Pakistan.
You would think that the Pakistani army would be very much all over this. But
well, they are, and the question is how, and there's an uproar in Pakistan, how can these types of not only venues but also these groups be protected? And so in Karachi, where you had this latest attack, the shrines have been closed for 3 months. They're going to look at the security. But I think something more fundamental has to happen, and there needs to be a restructuring of how Pakistan thinks about its own security, and part of it is securing these very sects that are coming under attack.
let's take a look at France now. France, as we know, has moved in ways that the Muslim community considers prejudicial, and now it's cropping up again somewhere where France has a past, in North Africa.
That's right. France is in the terrorist crosshairs. They have been traditionally, but they are in full force now. You've seen additional French hostages taken captive in North Africa by the Al-Qaeda group there called Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb. You've also seen France increase their threat alert level in France because of threats from Al-Qaeda proper. You've seen security increase to places like the Eiffel Tower, et cetera. And so all of this is happening at the same time when France has very much taken a strong view toward going after Al-Qaeda in North Africa, declared war, literally, on that group, as well as doing things like banning the public veil, the veil in public. The burqa has been banned, for example, and upheld in France. And so all of this has put France a bit in the crosshairs, and I think we're watching very carefully to see how France reacts to all this.
And does this public stance by the French government help or hurt the effort to calm relations with Islam?
Well, I think, and we've talked about this on the show before, all of the efforts in Europe at curbing public displays of Muslim culture or identity has certainly raised the temperature. You've seen it not just in France, but in Switzerland and Belgium and Spain. So I think it's raised the temperature. I think what's interesting, though, here is you have Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb really taking the lead to threaten France. Ayman al-Zawahiri, Al-Qaeda's number 2, once called AQIM back in 2006, the bone in the throat of the French. That's really what he wanted it to be. And in some ways, that's what it's becoming, unfortunately.
Let's turn for our final flashpoint to Indonesia, where the military has taken an increased role in pushing down and back against the militants.
Yeah, this is a story that's been a little bit off the radar, but an important one. The military is joining the anti-terror fight for the first time in the last 9-10 years. Largely, the anti-terrorism efforts in Indonesia, which have been quite successful, have been led by the police, special forces in the police known as Special Detachment 88, trained by the Australians and others. But what you have now is the military joining the fight. And this is important for 2 reasons. One, it demonstrates a sense by the political and military leadership in Indonesia that terrorism and some of the insurgent groups that are operating throughout, in particular in Sumatra, are a threat to the state of Indonesia. It's not just a criminal activity, and it's not just something related to Western grievances, but it actually is a threat to the state. But the other part of this that's interesting is it raises the specter of human rights abuses for which the Indonesian military has been, people have been concerned about.
Criticized.
Criticized in East Timor and Aceh. And so the Indonesians are going to have to be careful here because they're going to have to walk carefully, continue some of the success, use the resources of the military, but not overstep and inflame what may be internal tensions in that country.
Juan Zarate, our senior national security analyst, as always, thank you. We'll be looking at flashpoints in weeks to come.
Great, thank you.
And thank you for watching Washington Unplugged. We invite you to join us every day right here on CBSNews.com. I'm Bill Plante. Have a great day.